Hi everyone. Today is Thursday, February 24th, 2022. I'm Crystal Dawn Hill, and I'm here to do part 2 of my life journey video. I want to start out by doing the overview today and also recapping where I left off in part 1. In part 1, I started talking a little bit about when I moved out of the house from my husband and got my own apartment. And I wanted to go into more of that, but I ended up going back and talking about some things earlier in my life. And as promised, at the end of part 1, I want to really go into part 2 in this video, in the overview, and also in the more detailed video of part 2. So what I would like to say to begin about this apartment that I moved into, it offered me a lot of preparation, and it offered me the time to really discover my abilities, the deeper layers of reality that we don't see when we live on the surface. And it helped me get a better sense of direction of where I was really, not where I wanted to go, but where God was leading me in my life. And living there and meeting the people that I met and having the experiences that I did really gave me a much broader perspective of reality in general, and also my reality that I was destined to experience. So I did make a bullet list of points that I want to make sure I cover, and I'm going to go over those briefly in this overview, and then the ones that I feel inclined to discuss in more depth, I will do that in the next video. So I think the first thing that I want to talk about is the different people that I met. I met friends. I met people who I was romantically interested in, or so I thought. And I met people who would be beautiful mirrors to me of the abilities that I was just beginning to discover about myself. And there's one in particular who, he was an older man, and he always paid very close attention to what was going on in my life and my mystical experiences in my life. And I'm not going to go into too much detail. I might touch on him in more detail in the next video, but I really feel like it's important to say, just to start off with, while I'm talking about him briefly, is that he didn't make the best choices in his life, but he had a really beautiful heart. And I felt a deep soul connection with him, like as a uncle or a father figure. And he was really, I would even go so far as to call him a guide or a mentor, and not in his words or his direction, but just in being who he was. He just gave me a really good sense of the deeper meaning of life, in spite of his not misfortune or unfortunate circumstances, but not the best choices, not the choices that he made for his highest good. But he definitely cared about people and was a good soul. And when he passed several years after I met him, I really did feel his presence with me, and I felt like he was really good. So I think that the life that he led here on earth was a stark contrast from his sole purpose. And so I just want to honor him. The next thing that I would like to point out, that I want to make sure I go in more depth about in my next video, is that um, wow, I was experiencing a lot of mystical, um, out of this world experiences, synchronicities, um, you know, alignment with other people more so than I ever had before. I was also experiencing the most devastation in my life. Um, there was a lot of medical stuff going on with various family members. I was still trying to recover from um, having went out on my own after being married for several years, and trying to cope with I wasn't in a dire financial situation, but I was in a lot of debt and um, financial distress to where I wasn't sure what was going to happen next. And that's just par for the course on this journey, that we reach this point of uncertainty where we really have to learn to trust. And I think that was the foundation of where my trust in the divine really began. During all this crisis and uncertainty in my life, there was a wonderful member of the clergy who was a great mentor and gave me a lot of insight about the more mystical side of spirituality rather than the doctrinal or, orthodox side. And I'm very grateful to him as well, because he kept me grounded and centered, and he also helped me learn to trust as well, and not just feel like I had to take the world on my shoulders, but that I could actually trust the higher power and give a lot of that burden to God. Now I want to go into a little bit more of the other things that occurred in my life, and one was all of the beautiful friends that I met. There was a wonderful elderly lady who was also a wonderful mentor, and I mentioned her in part one of this series, and I believe it was part one. And there was another lady that I met that was a beautiful friend to me the whole time we were neighbors, and even after we both bought our own homes, she was still wonderful, and she helped me out if I needed something, and we talked quite often, so she's very special in my life as well. And I met another friend, and I will go into more detail about her, but for right now, I just want to say that when we met, she was a very strong mirror for me. We didn't look alike, but we did have similar physical characteristics and some quirky ones that we both had hang-ups about. And I won't go into detail about that, but just like little quirky things about our physical appearance that we, were conscientious about. We had those in common. Our smiles were similar, and we have very, very similar mystical beliefs, and we also had gone through a lot of similar challenges and obstacles in our life. And at the same time, we were very different people, and, go in our own direction. And then once in a while we bump into each other, and we spend a few moments catching up, but we've never been regularly in contact, just kind of in and out. But she is a very beautiful soul and very special to me. And there's one particular thing that was a very uncanny and unlikely synchronicity that we had, and I'm going to share that story in more depth in the next video as well. So the final thing that I want to go into a little bit in this overview, and then I'm going to close, is that overall, this place that I lived for about 7 years, which I find interesting that a lot of pivotal change happens in my life about every 7 years or so. And one thing that that I really noticed about living there was it was the most, it fostered the most growth and progression in my individual soul journey. And it is where I lived when so many different upgrades happened in my consciousness. So when I moved out of the house from my husband and I got out on my own, it was really the first time I'd ever been completely on my own. I'd always either been surrounded by a lot of friends and family or lived with friends or family. So it was really a coming of age for me, and it was it gave me the most time to be in my own element, to find my own voice, to find my own path. And I just got cold chills when I said that. And it was a transitional time for me as well, because just before I moved to, or excuse me, just after I moved away from there and bought my own home, is when I already knew about twin flames, but it was when shortly after I moved out of there and bought my own home is when I actually had my twin flame catalyst experience. And I already knew my catalyst, and we had been friends, or we had been acquainted for many years. And I actually had, like, I don't really want to call it a catalyst experience, although I guess it was in a way. But there was some other sort of, it was like it ignited my soul to set me on my personal journey many years before. And then when I moved out of my apartment and into my house, that's when we reconnected again, and I actually started believing he was my true twin. And speaking of that, I also would like to go into one other thing briefly here before I close. I had what is called two near twins. Now, I don't hear this term mentioned in the twin flame community at all. And at some point, I would like to do a video to break down my understanding of every different dynamic of relationship. But I do want to briefly touch on this because it really played a significant role in my twin flame journey, both prior to leaving my husband and after leaving the apartment and moving into my house. I beg your pardon, before I moved out of my apartment. This has been many years ago, and I am in my mid-50s, so forgive me for having the timelines a little bit mixed up. And also, since I've met my true divine partner and been fully immersed in the phenomena of the timelines twisting and changing and merging and integrating and all that, it has been a challenge to keep up with lineal time. So anyway, these two near twins, and I wanted to explain a little bit about what I mean by near twin versus false twin or pre-twin or twin flame catalyst or anything like that. They're soulmates, but what they are more specifically is my close circle of soulmates. So we have a circle of soulmates that have more of our own soul essence than just a regular soulmate that you might encounter or feel a warmth or familiarity with. And maybe, strike up a friendship or some sort of a camaraderie, these near twins were more closely connected with me, and also with my divine masculine. So they carried remnants of his energy as well as mine, and so that makes them even more closely connected with us both. And one was someone that I felt connected with 30 years ago, and really truly believed for a little while that he was my divine partner or twin flame. And then the other person was the maintenance person that I felt a connection with. There was no romantic involvement. We did experience a heart connection, and for a brief time I mistook that as romantic, but conscientiously I understood that there was no romantic involvement. And then years later, very recently, I discovered why I felt so connected with him. And I will go into that in more detail, perhaps in the other portion of part 2, where I go into all of these bullet points in more depth. So these near twins really, really helped me to integrate parts of myself. And they were very strong mirrors of things that I needed to either develop within myself or overcome or balance out or something like that. So that's what the near twin does for you, is you don't feel as closely connected with them as you do your, well, you feel as closely connected with them as you do your catalyst, but you don't get the same kind of emotional charge, like the energetic charge that you get from your catalyst. And that will only come more powerfully than your catalyst when you meet your true divine partner. So that's all I want to talk about for the overview. I thank you so much for following along. I know my voice is a little shaky this morning. It's because I wasn't really prepared for this all the way in, because I'm dealing with some other stuff in my outer life. But I felt very strongly guided to do it at this point in time. And so that's why my voice is shaking a little bit. And also because I've really never shared my whole entire story from beginning to end. I've never sat down with one friend or and gone over my whole story from beginning to end. And I've never even sat down with someone new and explained my story, even in parts, for any length of time. So doing this and remembering the details and stuff is a little bit taxing, but I really am passionate about doing it. And as I said before, I'm only sharing about the spiritual portion of my journey. I'm not sharing very much about my personal life, except for when it's necessary to go into for the purpose of further expanding on details about my spiritual journey. So thank you very much for following along. I wish you all the very best along your journey, and have a wonderful day.